I want to mention before I get started that all of the things you see here are still in progress and they're not connected to anything actually working. It's all just purely UI, no functionality behind any of this. Okay, so one thing we lost with collections was the ability for people to just come in and start a chat, like a simple chat. Maybe they want to upload a file, maybe they don't. But even when they upload a file right now, we kind of collections are baked into the process because that gets saved somewhere and it's part of a collection somewhere. So all of that complexity, let's say, that comes in with collections, we want to unfold that slowly, and there's no reason why first-time users have to pay the cost of understanding what collections are and so on to just be able to start getting value out of Storytel. So a big thing for us will be to simplify just like the getting started screen, which will just very likely be just being able to chat. And if you do upload any files, they would live just in the chat you're starting, kind of like the Chrome extension with the page that only lives in the chat you start in the page. And we've also worked to simplify the hierarchy of collections. We've noticed that many of our users struggle with the hierarchical nature of like nesting multiple collections inside collections and sub collections. That doesn't seem to resonate well with most of the users in terms of structuring their data or understanding exactly what's happening. And Jody, I'm gonna count on you to keep me honest and fill in if I miss any details. So please interject if you notice something. Um, so I have here kind of like an overview that we sketched out for the new way. Actually, it's better to show it in the UI. So we're still playing with this and it's very much work in progress. But what we have so far that we think might simplify things a lot is starting from the top level, we have something called workspaces. They're kind of, you can think of them as like the topmost way to organize stuff. And a workspace can have multiple projects inside of it. And if I go to projects here, so the workspace is kind of like a container for projects. And projects are, let me go back to here. So if a workspace is something like a marketing department or a product department, they can be like a bigger like project or something that people want to get done. Projects are smaller pieces of that where it's specific things you want to work on. The parallel between collections would be workspaces could be considered like the top most level collections, like root collections, and then the projects inside are like sub collections in a way of the workspaces. But we're trying to do away with like the nesting. So right now we don't think there's much value in having projects inside projects. So in any workspace, you'll just have a flat list of projects in that workspace. And projects are whatever you want them to be. Here we have some examples for like Q4 marketing campaigns, sales, pipeline analysis. And the way we'll do permissions is to do it, you can either permission a workspace or you can also permission individual projects slightly differently. And permissions can be done in a few ways. You can do it by user, like today, you'll be able to do it by teams. So you can give the sales team or the marketing team access to the marketing department workspace, for example, and then they will have access to everything within it. Or you can give like, you can make this project available to anyone on the internet with a link or just people you invited. So there's a few different ways to manage permissions at different levels. I don't want to talk too much, so I'm gonna invite people to already ask questions of what I've shared so far. If there's any, before I move along further, if there's any questions right now or feedback right now.
Yeah, definitely also observations. So how does this feel to everybody as compared to what's in production today? Would be really great to hear any initial reactions.
I think I agree when it's like kind of like a more simplified version of Storytell in a way that it feels more natural. Like the flow of how to use the product feels more natural, it seems, on this new version, as compared to collections. Not sure if that resonates with anyone else.
The UI looks a lot like linear. Not sure that was
That's no
inspiration.
coincidence.
Hmm.
Yep, it does.
But it looks more organized. I feel like it's easier to see what projects I'll be working on and what collections I can access instead of scrolling through an endless scroll of sub collections.
Okay. Thank you
Okay,
for that.
thank you. And I haven't really gone into this, but now it's a good time. So for projects specifically, projects are basically a way to manage scope and permissions. So if I go to view details for a specific project, um, each project will have certain knowledge kind of assigned to it. So for each project, you can decide which slice of knowledge that you have in your whole available knowledge. Let's say in this organization that I'm in right now, you can decide what the scope of that chat is. So that project, sorry. So for example, for Q4 marketing campaign, you'd probably not include anything apart from marketing materials. And you can imagine there'll be more files, assets, ingested content that you can assign under this. And then that project, for anyone who's working within that project, this will be the scope that they are talking to by default. So it's less an implicit scope of files existing in a project like we have in collections, where collections are both a way to organize stuff and to keep knowledge within, in a way. Knowledge is kind of like separately live somewhere else, and you can define the scope of each project to be whatever knowledge you want it to have access to. So we kind of separated the two concepts from how a collection would do things. And you'll have noticed there's some hashtags here. We're working on the name. I think for now we're calling them labels. And I don't know if we have a UI that shows the labels in here. Let me find one.
We did have one.
Yeah, it's here. So labels are, I guess, similar to the tags from Gen 1. We're kind of revisiting that interface. We do want to make some improvements, but labels are essentially a way to categorize either knowledge or other things, and they point to concepts. Giorgio, I feel like I don't have a great handle on like the labeling stuff. If you want to give a better
Sure.
overview.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back to that knowledge tab and let me see if I can use an actual example. So let's use, I'll see if I can annotate here. So like this, competitor analysis Q3. So this might have a label that a person places on it, like it's a, competitor analysis or something like that. But it might also have some dynamic labels that humans don't have to put on it. So a dynamic label could be like the name of the competitor that's pulled from the document. And a human has said, I want to have a container that is called competitors, but the actual values that are put into that container are pulled from the content instead of humans having to specify each competitor name, stuff like that. So that's the idea behind a dynamic label versus a static label.
So just to show it visually, a static label is just a name, like this piece of knowledge is a support ticket. Let's say we identified it or the user marked it as a support ticket. And then there's also dynamic labels, which are labels with dynamic values assigned to them. So if we know about the concept of a customer, a dynamic label could point to the customer, but have attached like the name or ID of the customer so that we can let users filter by this specific customer, for example, not just any customer. Am I getting that right, Joyo?
Yeah. Also, Andy,
Any-
could you go back to the projects page? I just want to take a screenshot of that so we can talk a bit more about it. And can you open up where you had the labels? Yeah. So for project scope, I think it's going to be important to be able to include specific files and not just labels. So I could drop a set of files in, but then also I'm able to drop more than one file at a time by dropping labels in. So we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. It's definitely work in progress. I think ultimately you won't just have the labels here, but you would also have a table for all knowledge in a way where you can select individual files, not just from underneath the label.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
Yep.
Agreed.
Also,
I'm gonna stop here. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I had a question. If you could open up view details as well.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed there was a checkbox for adding world knowledge. So is the plan to implement this like on a project level instead of a thread or smart chat level now?
Yeah, so we haven't made much progress on the chat interface yet. That's the next big thing we want to tackle. But the plan is that projects give you like the default set of scope that you'll start with in a chat, and you could of course override it by like at mentioning stuff. We haven't actually talked about if we want to have the toggle for including word knowledge, but we can, yeah, it can potentially be in a thread as well where you can override it. The plan is to move away from having everything in the prompt bar like we do now with a lot of buttons and toggles, and have a similar right-hand panel for a thread as well. So you can always see at a glance exactly what scope is happening in the thread. It's being used.
Got it. Okay.
Gonna wait for any more questions or feedback. Okay, the last parts I wanted to show were, I'm not sure if library is done. Oh, I showed this is just having assets that have labels attached to them. But there's also, we're trying to already think about having organization pages and ways to manage things in organizations. So of course you'd have like being able to set a name and potentially domains that are associated with the organization. You can manage the users within an organization or the teams. So you can assign users to different teams, not unlike other apps. We're already starting to think about usage and billing, and we've started kind of thinking about how to price things for LLM usage and so on. I think there'll be more information about that in a week or two. And we've also we can also give organizations the option to decide which LLMs they want to allow for the org. So for example, if for any reason an organization absolutely doesn't want to allow anyone to use DeepSeek or Llama or any other LLM, they can choose which ones to make available to anyone starting threads within that organization. And back to talking about labels, we're playing with the idea of having organization level labels, which are not unlike the tags in linear, where we have tags for a certain team, I think, or for our whole org. And one of the problems with Gen 1 was that the tags we added to any piece of knowledge were very noisy. We would add with auto detect many different types of tags, and we would add them all to a file after it's uploaded. This could be a way where an org manages which labels are important. And when we do automatic tagging or automatic labeling in Gen 2, it would only be automatic if it fits one of these labels. So if we detect that an asset has a feature request label, then we set that. But if we detect a label that's not in here, for example, let's say sales data that's not in here, then we will not automatically add that because it's not in the sanctioned org labels. Did I miss anything, Jordu?
Only thing I would add here, Andy, that we're not really showing off yet is going to be nested labels. So there could be, you know, different nesting statuses on these, where a label has like, you know, customer request colon some sub label to it. So we should start thinking about that.
Yep. I think we're still thinking on how we want to do that exactly. Cool. And the last thing I want to show is, let me find it. There's two things actually that Aaron was thinking about. We have different types of people coming in with different types of experience for both AI and familiarity with the platform. And this is kind of an initial experiment where maybe we'll show different things in the UI based on how experienced you are. So for example, a very basic example would be that if you're a total beginner to AI and to the platform, we need to show more tips. We need to guide the user on how to upload stuff. We need to guide them to how to actually structure, like if they need to create a project to structure their data. But if someone is like experienced with Storytell, then we don't really need to show any tips, and we'll just let them do their job and whatever they want to do. And these, we want to automatically detect these, but they're also optionally set by the user if they want to override and not get any tips or so on, or if they think they belong in a different category. So we're still figuring out what this means exactly for the UI, but I just wanted to talk about the concept of having different types of users coming into the platform. And the last thing is something we've taken kind of further from, don't know if you guys remember, but there were discussions for us to attach instructions to certain collections so that users can define a set of instructions for a collection that will automatically be applied anytime they start a chat in the collection. This is a more general way of doing that, and it's per user. And this will let our users configure default instructions that will be included with their prompts. And we have categories here that we can detect with our LLM router. So you can put different instructions for different types of tasks. So for me, for programming tasks, maybe I would specify what tech stack we're doing the work in, and I would ask it to use some of our principles of how we write code. If we have an analysis task, someone could write a detailed instruction here on how exactly they want the analysis. Like they always prefer to get a chart or a table when possible, and so on. And these, ideally, just like with the capabilities, we detect automatically and update over time. So we can pick out what preferences users have, because there's no reason if someone says in a prompt, I liked that table, but please add another column for blah, blah, blah. We could detect that and add it automatically to one of these instructions. But we should also let users override them in case we get it wrong.